Introduce myself. My name is Sonia Mermand. I work with Diversity Arts Australia. I look after training programs and webinars with them. And I am joined today by Genevieve Grieves, Clothilde Bullen, and Ben Graetz. So thank you everyone for joining us for our webinar today from consultation to co-creation, strengthening relational practice. So before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the First Peoples across the globe on whose unceded land this project was created. We pay deep respects to elders past and present and to all First Nations people, and we recognize that sovereignty was never ceded. We also, at Diversity Arts, we also like to acknowledge that diversity in all of its forms long predates white colonization in Australia. I'm joining you all today from the land of the Yokuts people, which is in California's Central Valley. We are a bit of a widespread team at Diversity Arts, and so I spent some time in Sydney and some time in California. And if you could please let us know where you're all joining us from in the chat, that would be great. You'll see that we have a chat option and a Q&A option in this webinar. The Q&A will be used during the Q&A portion of this conversation, and the chat is visible to all the attendees. So if you'd like to put your where you're joining us from in the chat, we would greatly appreciate that. We also have an Auslan interpreter here, Yasmin Dandachi. Thank you so much for being here. So if you need Auslan interpreting, if you want to make her more visible, you can go ahead and pin her on your screen by pressing the 3 dots, the ellipses, on the corner of her screen and choosing the pin option. And we also have captioning happening, so you can press the captioning button and it'll show up for you. In addition to that, we're recording today's session. And so we will be sharing that recording and some links from today with you all as well. So I'm just going to talk briefly about the Creative Equity Toolkit's Imagine project, which will come up in today's conversation. This conversation is a part of this project, and it was managed by Diversity Arts Australia, and it was led by GARUWA and Shifting Ground, and supported by Creative Australia and the British Council and Create New South Wales. So the Imagine project has captured 61 case studies from around the world, spotlighting groundbreaking work in cultural diversity, racial equity in the arts. And among them, the First Nations case studies, which were researched and produced by First Nations leaders and led by GARUWA and Shifting Ground, highlight how co-creation, self-determination, and ethical collaboration can transform cultural practice. And those are some of the topics that Jen, Ben, and Clotilde will be discussing today. So the session will focus on strengthening relational practices, identifying where power sits, what it means to return it, and how we can embed First Nations leadership and co-design in the arts. So whether you work in the arts, community, education, today's discussion will offer tools, insights, and inspiration to help you move from consultation towards genuine co-creation. Thank you so much for showing up today. I am going to now hand it over to the wonderful Genevieve Grieves, who will be leading today's conversation. Genevieve is an artist, an educator, a field builder, film director, oral historian. She wears many hats, and she's also the co-creator of GARUWA and Shifting Ground. So over to you, Jen.
Thank you, Sonia. Wayabu, everyone. I'm a Warramai woman, originally from the mid-north coast, and also a settler descendant with links to Scotland, Ireland, and England. And I'm living on beautiful Larrakia country in the north of Australia. And I want to acknowledge the Larrakia people who hold this place with such love and care. But every day living here, I'm reminded of the strong need for co-creation, not just in the arts and cultural sector, but across all initiatives. Communities have the answers to the problems they face that stem from colonisation, intergenerational trauma, systemic racism and injustice. What is required to meet these challenges is deep listening and ethical practice. Real power sharing and resources, top-down approaches just do not work. So I'd like to acknowledge all the traditional owners from here and all the countries you are coming from who are fighting for justice in all its forms, social, environmental, climate, and land justice. And I want to acknowledge the two speakers we have today, who are both cultural warriors making change in their communities and across Australia. It is hard, lifelong work, shifting power and making positive change for generations to come. So I want to also acknowledge that we're coming together at a really complex time. Many of us are feeling the injustices of the world we live in. We are witnessing the genocide of Palestinian people and experiencing an ongoing genocide here in Australia. We're in a time of climate collapse, and we're also facing a rising tide of racist attacks in this country. What I hold on to in these times is the power that we all hold to make positive change. I see that power very clearly in the two speakers that we have with us today. I'm deeply inspired by both of them and what they've been able to achieve in their practice. It's so heartening to see so many people from across Australia joining us for this talk and to hear from their wisdom and experience. And I really invite you, as you listen, to think about what change you can make in your family, in your community, in your sports clubs, in your workplace. We all have some personal power we can wield in our lives. And real change requires us to walk and work together, whatever our background or experience. So, yeah, I'm so excited to be here and to be part of this talk with these two people, as I say, who I respect a lot, talking about consultation, co-creation, strengthening relational practice. We might start just by getting our two speakers to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about who they are and what they do, and also what's bringing them joy at the moment. Ben, would you like to start?
Sure. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. I feel very honored to be here and be a part of this conversation. As you mentioned, it's very timely. There's a lot going on, not only within our local community, national community, but international community that I think affecting us on multiple levels. But my name is Ben Graetz. I was born and raised on Larrakia country, where Jen is. My family, my Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander family, Malak Malak, also from the Murrin clan, Kunkarigan mob, and also from Bardu Island on the Torres Straits. And my father is of German, English, Irish descent. So a big mix. I've been in the creative sector since I was 17, really, and went and studied in Perth with Michael Leslie for a year. And then my journey over to the East Coast began, and since then have been working as a performer, creative director, producer, writer, and director as well. So, and I know the lovely Chloe and Jen, and very honored to be speaking with them today. But very excited about this conversation actually, because as Jen mentioned, we've been working in this space for a very long time. Even, our ancestors and, our leaders before us. And so really this conversation is just a continuation of their struggles too, and being able to, yeah, bring light to it, visibility, speak to it, and hopefully in a way create a positive change, as Jen said, and bring hope to all of our community.
And what's bringing you joy at the
Oh, joy, I
moment?
forgot about that. Yes. What is bringing me joy is today is my third wedding anniversary with my husband. And so that's very joyous today. And very, blessed that we're able to be married and be married in this country. And so I'm very joyous of that. But went for a walk today. I'm beautiful Bundjalung country here in the Northern Rivers and walking along the beach, and I got to see the whales out in the ocean as I was on my morning walk. So that brought me a lot of joy.
Oh, I'm a little bit jealous of that. It's so beautiful. Chloe, can you introduce yourself and tell us what's bringing you joy?
Hi, Yaron. Delicate Quirl Clotilde. My name is Clotilde. Hello. I want to say congrats to Ben on your wedding anniversary. That is an achievement in and of itself. Amazing. Um, I am a Wurundjeri, Kaurna and Budimaya woman. So my background is Noongar from one of the nations, or two of the nations actually, Wadandi and Kaniang, which is down in the southwest, Margaret River country, wine country, and Budimai, which is going up through the sort of Murchison. So my family background covers most of the state of Western Australia, and I grew up sort of mostly here. I'm on Boorloo at the moment. And then my dad is actually British. He came out when he was 15. And so I have the colonizer and the colonized embodied in my physical being, which I think is something a lot of us have and we grapple with all the time. But I moved across, a lot of people might know me from being in Sydney at the MCA. I was at the MCA for nearly 5 years and absolutely loved my time on Gadigal country and was warmly embraced by everyone who was there sincerely. And it was a beautiful time. And it's been interesting to reflect on that time, which was such a joyous and optimistic time. And then that sudden change in the last couple of years. I've been back on home country for a while, or Mojak country, which is not home country. And the changes that have happened in the last few years. It's been insane how quickly things have sort of shifted and where things have gotten to. And I think we're all feeling it, as you said, Jen. I think we can't ignore that. I think a lot of us are carrying really heavy hearts, and, you know, Karen and Court's spirit, and our heart is very heavy at the moment. One thing I continue to see, though, and I continue to look for is the good in people. What I want to explicitly notice when people are doing good things, and it can be the smallest things in our communities. I am very aware of what's going on out there, but I try to see the small acts of good that happen. And I mean that genuinely, because it's the only way I can feel positive about what's going on. The thing that's bringing me joy, I mean, we were having a bit of a yarn prior to this about this, but I guess it is bringing me joy. My son, their father is also Aboriginal, and my son is undertaking ATAR at the moment. He's a week off ATAR exams. He's got 6 ATAR subjects because he wants to be a quantum physicist, and we're all feeling it in this household. It's a really stressful time. But what's bringing me joy about that is I'm really proud of him, and it's my son's kind of absolute determination, knowing that, you know, there are not a huge amount of Aboriginal people in STEM and across sort of these sorts of sciences, particularly frontier or quantum physics. He is determined to create not only a degree but a career and a space in that for Aboriginal people. And I'm so proud of that, and that no matter what happens, I don't care what happens, but it brings me great joy. So yeah.
Oh, what a beautiful start. So much joy and wisdom in all of that already. And I really agree on, focusing on the small things and the small changes that we can see, because, the world is unwieldy, and we've got to shift it step by step, don't we? I'd like to really start with a sense check. Like, you two are across so many things, and you've had so much experience across the arts and cultural sector. But from your perspective, how are we traveling? What are we seeing, or what are you seeing around you at the moment? Is there a big shift towards decolonization and ethical practices and collaboration, or are we still seeing a lot of colonial and extractive practices in the arts and cultural sector? Ben, maybe you want to start.
Big question, yes. We've only got an hour, everyone, so we won't be able to solve everything. But look, for me to have a bit of a sense check, I think, coming out of COVID, I think we're still really feeling the effects of that. I'm in live performance and theatre, festivals, and generally the industry is really struggling. We've lost a lot of funding. There doesn't seem to be a lot of money. And so on top of the challenges of trying to be in a thriving sector, we also have the challenges of being a black fella in that industry as well. And it's I often tell the story of when I was much younger. Um, I used to go to a lot of big events and a lot of land rights moments. I was there at the Barunga in 1988 when Bob Hawke promised a treaty. And I talk about how much hope I had as a young person. And then now I'm 47 years of age, and I feel like in a lot of ways we've gone backwards. And that's really hard for me as an adult, now trying to navigate through a space where I'm unsure of what my future is or what my future is for my daughter or our daughter, mine and Jen's daughter. And so it's a really hard question to answer because I think there's a lot of we have to look at the sector as a whole, but then we have to look at socially what's happening within for Black Mob as well, for all First Nations people, you know. And so I think we're really struggling. I just want to say one thing that Chloe said as well about how quickly things have changed, and I agree. Like I feel like things have just in the last couple of years are really upside down. But
Yeah.
what gives me hope is that if it can change that quickly to go one way, it can change that quickly to
Yeah.
go the other way. And I'm a very hopeful person. I think we all are on this call. But every now and then, you know, I do find that really struggling. So I haven't really answered your question, but I think for me, it's really about I'm in a space where I'm finding it really, really challenging, not only as an artist in this sector, but as a First Nations person in this sector, I'm finding it extremely challenging. And I don't think a lot of people have the answers, to be honest.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I I'm gonna say things from like a personal, but also like a big, broad overview. So, what I think we have to remember is that what I'm seeing and having lived elsewhere and worked elsewhere, there's differences in the way that different art sectors in different states have responded to the whole variety of the cacophony of noise that's kind of going on at the moment. So I think there's no one way to sort of describe what's going on because in fact what happens in Naarm is very different to what happens in Boorloo and is very different again. You know, like there are different responses from communities, and distance makes a difference because, you know, here in WA, there's a bit of a like, well, we're just doing our own thing. So, you know, we'll just get on with it sort of thing. It's weird. And whereas when you're in the thick of things in perhaps, you know, like Gadigal country or like wherever, it becomes much more intense and people have a different response to various things that are going on. The one thing I will say is that post-referendum, what has been enabled is the massive kind of coming out of racism in this country that previously I think we had, and I'm old, I'm Gen X, I've lived through a whole lot of stuff. And I sort of saw through the kind of 90s, there was this golden time of, and particularly after sort of the speech that Keating gave, there was some landmark moments where people really felt that there was such a positive way forward. Post-referendum, that has shifted massively, and I think it's given a lot of people in this country the keys to kind of just letting it all out and being as, you know, racist and as whatever as they like. And when you allow for that to happen, what then happens is that society becomes poorer for it, and it enables the presence of other prejudices and other grievances and other things. It's like it opens that Pandora's box. And so that's what I've sort of seen happen post-COVID, post-referendum. From an arts sector perspective, I think, you know, we saw with what happened with Creative Australia that there is this massive rallying in the arts sector to act as a rebuttal or a retort to some of that, some of what's going on. And I was really kind of in the thick of things because I was still the chair of NAVA at that time. And of course, NAVA was really, you know, supporting and advocating for not only Khaled and Michael, but like a whole range of artists who were experiencing things. And I was really heartened by that there just seemed to be this massive surge of kind of advocacy and support, not just for those artists and curators, but for a whole range of people. So I would say that when we have a common enemy, we become really strong, and that's what I saw happening. I think the current state of the sector has improved somewhat. I know people would not agree with me on this, but I actually see that in terms of since the release of the Creative Australia's big document and a whole range of new funding streams, and we have in Western Australia we have a new creative industries minister, for example. I'm seeing there's new funding streams and there's new ways of thinking about creativity. So in fact, and not everyone will agree with me on this, but I see that there's some positive changes from a very base level around access and equity in terms of funding and in terms of, you know, what we're thinking of as our creative ecosystem. The issue around indigenisation versus decolonising is still there. I believe in indigenisation. I actually don't give this. I'm trying not to swear. I don't care really about decolonisation. I was going to say something else. I care about indigenisation, and that relates to cultural sovereignty, and that's for me what's important, because when you're decolonising, as far as I'm concerned, you're still in response to an other. You're still behaving and reflecting and creating in response to another. And I'm interested in how that pans out, but I'm not that interested in undertaking that work. So that's my response.
Yeah, it's so interesting. There's so much in both of what you said, because there's all these waves, isn't there? You know, like waves forward and waves backwards. And, you know, talking to some people up here who've been around for even longer than us, you know, are saying things were so much better 20 years ago than they are now. But then we're having, these really positive shifts. You know, there are conversations in the sector that wouldn't have happened 20 years ago too. So it's it's almost hard to get a handle on all the different things that are happening, which you rightly say, Chloe, is so different depending on where you are in the country as well.
And I think it's really important, Jen, to reiterate that, is that, you know, and that was a really good point. Thanks, Chloe. Just that, you know, us three, we definitely speak from our perspectives, and me as a First Nations man, I speak from my own lived experience, and I don't represent everyone's point of view as well, and I don't pretend to speak on all Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people. So I think it's really important just to make that clear. And yeah, definitely from each state, territory, clans, mobs are all completely different as well. So that also what makes it a bit complex as well. And a part of this conversation is, you know, when we are navigating through these spaces, we are often seen as the one that can kind of speak on behalf of everyone or solve all the First Nations problems. And it's just simply not possible. But we are able to do it in a way that is able to do it effectively, ethically, not without its challenges. I'm sure all of us have been in a situation where, you know, as Chloe said, living on Gadigal country and operating through there. So, you know, we have to also take that into consideration, as well as that navigating through those different political spaces can be challenging as well. But yeah, it's really important that, you know, this is our my perspective. I don't know. I think we all think the same.
Yep, absolutely.
And it is interesting, like just thinking about the context of the work that we do, because we've all worked in our own spaces and worked in other spaces. And yeah, you talk a bit about that in your case study as well, don't you, Chloe? Like about having to really respond to the place and the context that you're in, because we are so diverse and our challenges are so diverse, you know, across the country. Having worked in Naarm for a very long time and now being in Darwin, it's a very, very different situation with different access and different issues. And
Well, sorry, Jen, I did want to say really, really quickly, the thing that gives me great peace when I think about everything that's going on at the moment is everything goes like that, right? It's like the tides. And when I think about the elders in my community here, they have waited and waited, and they've seen it all coming through, and they still are very intact, and they're very, I mean, that's not to say they haven't had heartbreak and devastation, all those things, but they're intact because they have a very clear kind of picture about all things shall pass kind of thing. Like they really know how to stand steady and just let those waves come. And that's sort of what I feel, that all of these things shall come to pass, and we will still be there at the end of it. And we will still be able to do what we need to do. So that gives me, like, I find great peace in that, I think, in navigating all of this.
Thank you. That's beautiful, Chloe. I'd like to talk a little bit about consultation and collaboration. So in your minds, like, what are the differences between consulting, which is still, a practice that happens a lot, and collaborating? Maybe you want to start, Chloe.
Well, okay, the first thing I always say to people is, if they're thinking, oh, I've got this great project and I asked an Aboriginal person to come and do this with me. And the first thing I say is, but did that Aboriginal person approach you to do the project? Is it their idea? Or do they want you to work with them? Because if they haven't, then that's not a collaborative, equitable project. If they didn't come up with that idea, if they didn't come to you and say, I want to work with you and I want to work in this way, then you're starting off from a place of a power inequity. Because because we're like, relationally, we're, blackfellas in this country, like there's a power inequity. We know this. This is not new to anyone. So what we want to do is, even when people think they're being collaborative, if it's not that community's idea, then that you have to be very cautious and really kind of surface the whys and the power inequities that exist in a non-Indigenous person broaching that and coming to someone with a project or a problem to be solved or whatever. That's the first thing I say to everyone is, did that Aboriginal person ask you to do this project? Do they want to do this? Have they approached you? Because that shifts that power dynamic. So that is the first sort of thing, I think, to think about.
I think that's such a good point, and I often, and I just want to say that Jen and Chloe are so much more articulate than me at all these types of things. So
that's not true.
You explain that so well.
Untrue, Mr. Graetz.
But no, I agree with you, and I think definitely for me, when I'm working in that space, I think the difference for me, like consultation, in a way, like I find that that's quite transactional. And something that I think is like, you pay for that consultation and then you pay for whatever that is. Whereas a collaboration, I think, is much more about, it's a respectful relationship, that it has to come from, I agree that it has to come from, if you're in that collaboration, from that First Nations person. If you're not, we could talk about that as well, but we don't have a lot of time. But to me, I think collaboration is much should be much more respectful. It's also it needs to be like the time. It needs to be a long relationship as well. And I'm sure we're going to talk about, for me, the basis of it all is that there's separate processes, there's separate ways of doing things, and it's the black way and it's the white way. And I think one of the things that I've really struggled with, whether I'm in a consultation or in a collaboration with whoever it may be, an organization or an event, is really having non-Indigenous people understand that there's a completely different way for First Nations people to be able to do business and to and create work or whatever the project is. But the main protocol that I say to people is around time. Like you need to allow yourself time. You can't rush these things. And so, if it is a collaboration, that you need to be willing to, indigenize your space, your processes, And actually, one thing Jen said was deep listening, to have that deep listening to be able to respect. And so that's my kind of two takes on consultation and collaboration.
That was deeply articulate, Ben. Thank you.
Yes.
Well,
You
thank
said
you.
I'm not going to be articulate, and here I go. So yeah, what is it like? What does it feel like when you've been in those ethical collaborations or witnessed them? Like, what does this good work feel like? And do you have any examples that you can
Well,
share of something that's just worked really well and why it worked?
I mean, I
go for it.
definitely do. Yeah, no, I definitely do. Which that also brings me great joy,
Oh no,
Jen,
I
actually.
was like, yes, we've got some good ones. That's good.
Yeah, we have got some good ones. But mostly I think it's because they've been in the hands of Aboriginal people in the first instance. And so I think that makes all the difference. But the thing that I can think of, I totally agree, Ben, about the time thing. You know, this is about relationships. Like this whole thing that we're talking about is about relationships,
Yeah.
right? If you're not willing to actually have relationships with people in a not a transactional sense, but in a sustained long-term thing, then that's the first issue. And I think that's where people fall apart because they don't have long-term relationships with blackfellas in the community. So that's part of it. But the good, recently, this will sound like a plug, and I don't want it to sound like a plug, but it was genuinely so beautiful. So I curated a show recently called The Neighbour at the Gate, and it was it wasn't just me curating it. I should be very clear about that. Michael Doe and Zali Morgan also were in the curatorium with me, but I was the lead curator on it, and the whole kind of impetus for this show was bringing together Asian Australian artists and First Nations artists. And it came from a thing that I thought about because I grew up in the KGB here, which is Kandoola, Balga, Girraween, the Bronx of Perth, blackfellas and Asian delis. That's what it was. And I loved it. That's how I grew up. And so we always had, long-standing relationships with Asian mob here in Australia. And anyone, particularly if Northern Territory or the Kimberleys, you know this. It's black and E's everywhere, right? So we know this. And I wanted to talk about this in a show, and I wanted to talk about that as a really positive thing that had nothing to do with kind of colonial society, but to do with our relationship with Asian mob. So that first kind of thing about indigenizing that and making it about our relationship with them, that was great. That supported that idea. The approach that we took was to have long-term relationships with people, which we kind of already had anyway. But we did a workshop with like a full sort of day where we just sat with all of the artists and the curators and yarned basically. And it wasn't kind of trying to have any kind of particular outcome except that we were there to have a relationship and to get to know one another and to think about what it meant for Asian Australia and First Nations mob to have relationships in this country. What did that mean? And that kind of collaborative process that wasn't about achieving this outcome where we need, but just was an opportunity to yarn, to come together, acknowledging those kind of power structures, to come together to acknowledge how colonisation had impacted. It was called The Neighbour at the Gate because at the immigration gate, people who were coming to this country know virtually nothing, are told nothing about Aboriginal people and the history of this place. And so it acknowledged that, and we talked about the impact that had had, but we mostly just talked about our relationships with each other. And that whole process, and I would suggest, all the artists kind of spoke to us about this later and said this was the most it was the most care that they'd had in any kind of curatorial process because it felt genuinely collaborative. It felt like we were side by side with them. And they said the same thing as well. So I'm not speaking out of turn for them because they came to us and said that. So that felt really collaborative, but it was because we'd taken the time, as Ben said, we'd shown care and cultivated the relationship, and that it had nothing to do with anyone else but ourselves.
Such a beautiful example. Thank you. Ben, what's coming to mind for you?
There's a couple of things that, I think I've worked in a really kind of respectful, collaborative way. I think one of the kind of most immediate examples is being a part of the Indigenous Advisory Group for Brisbane Festival. So the Brisbane Festival's on right now. And it's just, I've been a part of that and we can unpack advisory groups. We're not going to do that here, but
That's another webinar.
that's another
Yes.
webinar. But this is actually, an incredible advisory group led by Arnie B and Arnie Raylene, who are two powerhouses that have been a part of the Brisbane Festival in that capacity for over 2 decades. So when we talk about long-term relationships, we're talking about over 20 years, and so to be able to walk in that space and have, the CEO, Charlie Cush, and Lou, the AD, that are also deeply committed to wanting to support Aboriginal culture, shows, capacity build, is just such a breath of fresh air to walk in that and to be supported and to be, to have a complete seat at the table and a really respectful seat at the table. And in other kind of advisory groups that I've been a part of, what has worked really well in those situations is the non-Indigenous people do all the work. And so they really bring First Nations people on to advise, which is what an advisory group's
Yep.
about, not to do the work. And so you can give suggestions and say, this is what I feel, and then they take that away and then they do the work. And in a couple of, I think I did it in one of the case studies as a part of this, but it's just so refreshing to have non-Indigenous people get what it takes to actually work authentically and respectfully with Black people, is to actually do the work. And I wrote something down earlier that I really love. It's also about knowing when to listen, knowing when to let go, and knowing when to move on. And I think that's what's really important for me in a collaboration, is for non-Indigenous people to understand that, but also to be culturally competent, which is a whole nother webinar, which is what you do
Yeah.
then with
Yeah.
shifting grounds. But
Yeah.
cultural competency is huge.
Yeah.
Yep.
We're getting some really interesting questions. Hello, Kate Tamburin. I see your question.
Okay.
I'm wondering if it's sort of been answered by what we've just been talking about, because Kate's asking about the sharing some of the shortcomings of consultation and the key factors of co-creation that we can embed in the work that we do. I think we've kind of answered that, but is there anything else that we can bring to that notion of co-creation? She's thinking particularly in museum gallery context.
I mean, I would suggest that you always need to surface the power relationships and address them before you do anything else. So I think that's number one. And you can do that in a multitude of ways. You can do it as a memo or in a document. You can do it as just a vocal thing. You can do it as an agreed upon framework that gets set into policy. There's a lot of ways you can do that. I reckon that's number one. And I think the second one is exactly as Ben said, give it time. You have to have a decent amount of time. Go in thinking that you're not going to all have your own way. This is just the thing of compromise between everyone. But also to have an agreed upon outcome. And I have been consistently surprised by how many people don't come out of a consultative or collaborative approach having an agreed upon outcome between the parties involved. People sort of think that bit will fix itself. And I think if you don't have an agreed upon outcome and address people's expectations, that's when you run into problems. So I think those, for me, are some of the key things.
Yeah, that's really valuable. Thank you, Chloe. Ben, do you have anything else that you think is really central to the success of co-creation?
I think the big thing for me is cultural competency, to be honest, and I think that it's about non-Indigenous people, because it's no longer up to the Black mob to solve the problems or to bring all the answers. It's really up to the non-Indigenous mob to really start kind of stepping up, really. And as Chloe said, that's from the top all the way down. And if you don't have that from the top, then you're already set up for, it not being
Yeah.
a success. And, you know, without giving Jen the plug, but, you know, the work that Shifting Grounds does in terms of allowing organizations and people to have the language or the kind of dialogue is so important, because without that, there's nothing, there's no foundation. There's no, you don't know what you don't know. So
Yeah,
you're just making it up. And, you know, exactly having those things in place, knowing where you're going, but, you know, start to become culturally competent. You know, we have to be culturally competent in
right,
colonizers and non-colonizers way. So
right. We're code
Yeah.
switchers, right? Like
code
we've had to
switches,
do
that's
that.
right.
It shouldn't be our problem anymore. We've already
No.
got those skills. It
Yeah.
shouldn't be our problem anymore.
And it's making visible those systems, the Western
Yeah.
systems, because that
Yeah.
whole whiteness and Western culture is just normal culture and everyone else is different. But if we don't start to make that visible and say, actually, this is a Western way of working and it's in conflict with how we work. So that is the work of our non-Indigenous allies, is to make those systems visible within themselves. Got a question for you, Chloe. A couple of questions around indigenizing, you know, and asking if you can expand on that a little bit, and cultural sovereignty. And also, like, what is the place of non-Indigenous people in that concept of indigenization? So how can we support this, is the question, given that it's work that needs to be done by Indigenous people.
Yeah, so this is just my version of it, because I'm not reading off a thing saying this is the definition, but, you know, cultural sovereignty at its heart implies that that any in this case First Nations person has the ability to enact and conduct their cultural norms and cultural continuity in a way that they see fit, without the kind of hampering of the various kind of societal structures. What the implication in that is that cultural sovereignty is inherent, just as human rights, as there are human rights inherent in the way that we live. So it's inherent. And when we talk about sovereignty, a lot of people relate this to land and those sorts of things, but actually, whilst our culture can be embodied in land, it is embodied in us as well. So it's the inherent right of that human to kind of enact culture. And there is a political aspect to that as well. And so, you know, when I think about indigenizing, I think about it as the mechanism or the vehicle to enact cultural sovereignty, if that makes sense. And I hope that sort of does. And so when, and as I said, like when you are decolonizing, you're still doing a thing that is in response to white culture by its inherent nature. You are still, I'm responding to colonization and I'm decolonizing. It still puts you on the same kind of, it's not even a Venn diagram, you're still on that same spectrum. But indigenizing by its very nature, is it's the mechanism of cultural sovereignty, implies that, in fact, that's got nothing to do with anyone else, and it's all to do with you, your embodiment of your cultural values and your cultural norms and everything else. And it stands you individually, but it stands you in your own community, whatever that is. And that has nothing to do with colonial structures at all. The beauty of it, I hope I'm making sense. The beauty of it means that because we talk a lot about, I mean, I love this shit. I love talking about power structures because I think it should, sorry, I just swore, sorry.
No.
But
Welcome, mate.
I think we should always be talking about this. It implies when you are indigenizing, your power and where you stand is exactly in the same place as that other person, not down here, not trying to decolonize and rectify and bring all that up to equity. You're standing as equals. And that's what I love to see. And hopefully that's explained it.
Definitely. And I was going to say one is definitely more empowering and one is very disempowering. And I think that, you know, that's for me as a Black person, you know, that's how I see it as well, as indigenizing it's much more empowering for me.
Yeah, and restoring and healing and connecting with our own spirit. That was beautiful, Chloe. It was incredible explanation.
Sorry for swearing.
No, I don't think any of us mind swearing.
Called passion.
Yeah, it is Expression. So I think we've got time for one more question, and it's from a First Nations person who says, I'm working inside a toxic environment where indigenization is really tough. Is it better to walk away or stay in there to try to change the
Mm.
space? Ben, what do you reckon?
Well, first of all, I just want to, say that I feel you, and really honor that, you're you're in that space, and that you're still there, and that you're doing the best that you can. I think all of us, as a part of this panel, have been in that situation with you, and it's extremely challenging. And at the end of the day, my belief is that, your happiness and your health and well-being always comes first. And so you were the only one who knows how to kind of monitor that. And when I worked on Sydney World Pride a few years ago, and that was a big major event. And we had a First Nations team and had to lead that team. And one of the things that really helped me get through that major event was setting myself non-negotiables. And I had non-negotiables such as, if this job starts to affect my relationship with my husband, then that's non-negotiable. If my health and well-being is affected, that's a non-negotiable. If my community is put at risk, or that I have to sacrifice things for my community, that's a non-negotiable. And I would do that at the start of each year, and I would stick to that. And that would be my guide. And I would use that as when I went into meetings, if I went into kind of negotiations, at any time if any of my non-negotiables were compromised, I would exit. And I had no qualms in leaving if my non-negotiables were crossed, because at the end of the day, you're a human being, and you have to live your life, and you have to, you don't want to be sick, you don't want to have a broken relationship, whatever it is,
Yeah.
so I feel that, a part of it is listening to yourself, and be guided by that, um, and just, yeah, I think that's what I would say. I don't know, Chloe.
Yeah, yeah, love all that. Thank you. It's actually a really good reminder to myself as well, because I forget that stuff. So that's super good. Oh, my heart hurts for you, whoever has put that in like that we literally have all been there, and it is, yeah, heartbreaking and difficult and draining and all those things. What I will say is this, you are not required to give over your life for this cause. To be an Aboriginal person, it is not required. We all feel when we come into jobs, and particularly when we have a profile, or if we are visible in places or whatever, that we feel like we've got this responsibility to represent our community and to, and all those things. And yes, to some extent that's true, but you cannot put that all on your back and think that that is, for you, I need to carry. It is not. We are a community. We come from communal societies. It is not our load individually to carry. And the best way we can serve our community is to actually still be upright, standing, and able to give. And we can't do that if we're absolutely burnt out from a terrible job or position or difficulty at work.
Mm.
Yeah, thank you both for those beautiful answers, reminders to all of us. Yeah, and we all have been in that space with you. It's sort of time to wrap up, and I'd love to hear from both of you. Any sort of final thoughts, reflections? I know there's a couple of questions about non-Indigenous people and how they can support this work. If there's anything you want to add to that, but really just your own thoughts and feelings at this point, at the end of this 1 hour that went very quickly. It could have been a
Very
lot.
quickly.
Yeah.
Oh, I think I just want to say that, it's a true testament to the work that we're talking about, and ethical co-creation and collaborations is by you showing up on this webinar, and you being here, because that's the way that we're going to create change. Also, one of the things that I wanted to kind of say as well is that, we make up, 3.8% of the population. We're a small community in the grand scheme of things, but the demand for what we do is huge. And so we really need incredible non-Indigenous allies to work with us because we can't do it on our own. And so, you know, conversations like this really excite me because I'm excited by collaborations. I'm excited by the future of our mob and who we are as a country. Like that really excites me. And deep down in my heart, I believe that the majority of Australians really want to see good for all of us. And I think as human beings, I believe that. And so we just need to work out how we do that. And there's lots of things we've spoken about in this, you know, protocols around time, around, you know, cultural competencies, those types of things. But, you know, we need allies and we need people to be able to be on this journey with us who really understand what it means and what it means to listen deeply, to walk on country, to really understand that the country doesn't own the country. We don't own the country owns us, Mother Nature, and our country is in charge, not the other way. And that's just one little simple way of black and white mentality, very, very simply. And so until you can understand that as well, then, you know, there's a lot of cultural competency to do. But my thing is that, you know, I'm very hopeful. I'm just am so grateful that this conversation could happen, because, you know, it's made me feel a little bit lighter and given me a little bit more hope about the future of where we're going.
Thank you, Ben.
So beautifully said. What I would say to anyone that wants to, you know, we're talking about co-creation and collaboration is, I think the big thing that people have to, non-Indigenous people have to think about is do not be afraid to get things wrong. Do not be afraid to make a mistake and to feel like you're doing things the wrong way. Put your ego aside, put your, you know, all your things around guilt or around whatever it is that you're feeling, put it all aside. We are human beings all in this together, interacting, and that is the way you approach it from one human to another. We have our cultural backgrounds and we have all those things, but what we can bring, what everyone can equitably bring to a relationship is their whole selves, is their humanity. And so I think absolutely people should remember that you're gonna make mistakes, you're gonna do things wrong, you're gonna feel stupid, you're gonna feel embarrassed. Do not let perfection be the enemy of good. Do not let that be a barrier to attempting to make things work in partnership with Aboriginal people.
I get it wrong all the time.
Same.
We all do.
Same.
And how we
Same.
learn. Yeah, like what beautiful, warm, wise words from both of you. I do feel lighter as well. Actually, needed this conversation. It's really uplifted me. And I think there's just so much, so much people can take from this conversation. And just to remember as well, I think that our ways of working are not just for working with us, they're actually good for everyone. You know, relational practice, bringing your whole self, all of these things we're talking about is really what we need now to meet the times that we're in. So there's a lot of wisdom that everyone can gain from our approaches and connect with those diversity arts case studies. You know, both Chloe and Ben have got longer interviews with lots of material. So have a read of them. We've also got another talk like this coming up very soon on racial literacy with some amazing speakers. That's on the Wednesday, the 29th of October. Details will be in the chat. So sign up for that. Be another seminar like this. And just a big thank you to both of these amazing people for taking the time to be with us and share their wisdom and knowledge. But to Lena from Diversity Arts, who kind of drove this whole project and really has been working really ethically and respectfully in the way that she's collaborating with us. The Imagine case study partners, Create New South Wales, Creative Australia, British Council, Sonia, our team at GARUWA, Yasmin, thank you. And thank you all for being with us today and sharing in this time. Take care of yourselves.
Thank you, everyone.